With a quorum present, I'd like to call this meeting of the Co-op Budget Committee to order at 6:33 p.m. This is a regular meeting for the Budget Committee for the month of September. While our meetings typically occur on the fourth Thursday of every month, we switch to the fifth, I just said Wednesday, didn't I? Fourth Thursday of every month, we switch to the fifth Thursday due to a conflict, due to the open house that was scheduled here at the middle school, which was taking place on the fourth Thursday. So rather than avoid the conflict and a lot of the activity that was taking place that evening, we moved to the fifth week of the month. The agenda was posted in advance of the meeting as required. I would like to introduce myself, Darlene Mann, and the members present this evening, which include Tom Whalen, Cindy Van Conant, Matt McGuire, Brian Rader, Raul Blanchet, I'm not sure why this is so difficult this evening, Tony Stenizzi. Dave Blinn has an excused absence for this evening, and I'd like to also introduce our BA, Kelly Seeley, who's with us this evening. If you could all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I ask at this time if there are any adjustments to the evening's agenda. Seeing none, we can move on to an appointment of a meeting observer, which would be Tony for this evening. And we can move on to the approval of minutes from the August meeting. The minutes were distributed and there were some notes made in the template for this evening's meeting that just included some minor typographical errors. So at this point, I'll
make a motion to accept the meeting minutes as written.
Great, from Raul, fantastic. Took the words right out of my mouth. Seconded by Tony. Are there any other comments, additions, deletions? Seeing none, all those in favor of the August minutes?
Aye.
Aye, unanimous, 700. Thank you. At this point, we'll move to public input, and seeing no public present, we can move right through to the general business portion of the meeting. Kelly shared with us, she passed around as we were getting ready for this evening's meeting, the FY22 year-end results for the co-op. So Kelly, if you don't mind leading us through, that would be great.
Sure, absolutely. I'll make this pretty quick because it is a pretty simple answer, but let me also direct you to the last few pages of what I handed you, just as a reference. This is the MS 25, kind of right off the presses. This is the document that goes to the DOE, I'm sorry, the Department of Revenue Administration. There's the DOE 25, which goes to the DOE, but this is all the detail for the year-end results. And then I can direct you to page 3, which is a more detailed explanation of how the year ended with why our balances are the way they are. And then if you look at the very bottom of page 2, these are the results you've been waiting for. So the actual amount that we'll be returning to the taxpayers to offset the tax rate is $1.509 million. And the little box next to that shows you what we budgeted for. We budgeted to return $200,000 to the taxpayers. And I can briefly go over some of the drivers. I mean, you can see in the balance on the expenses side there, the balances that we ended the year with. But just as a little bit more explanation, the primary drivers for those balances are $1.2 million in special ed savings, and that's primarily because of transportation. We had students moving out of the district, we had program changes, and we had a lot of unfilled positions as well. Then next on the list is salary-related savings, and that would follow under the benefits line. That's due primarily to unfilled positions, mostly. And then we also had some hiring savings. We had some unpaid dollars as well that resulted in savings. Remember, this year we still were dealing with COVID early on in the year, so some of that unpaid leave is because of that. And then We also had benefit, I'm sorry, I said that was in the benefits line. That is not in the benefits line. That is scattered throughout the other lines. What is in the benefit line is the benefit-related savings related to those unfilled positions and hiring savings. And we also had enrollment changes that we had based on the new hires that we hired. And then we had a one-time workman's comp and unemployment compensation refund for about $25,000. And lastly, we had professional development savings of $81,000. So that roughly adds up to our balance for the year there. And I'm happy to answer any other questions. There's other things, of course, that make up those balances, but those are the primary drivers.
I don't recall a year where we've ever had that significant of a special education.
Yeah.
You know, we've had savings, and we see special education kind of ebb and flow,
Yes.
as, you know, movement up from the elementary districts and things like that, but I really don't remember a year that it's been
No, I
that
agree.
significant.
And-
I understand it's compounded by some of the vacancies with paraprofessionals and things like that, but that's really significant.
It is significant, yes. Don't get used to it.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, looking at, you know, going into this year, and I guess, you know, projecting out, well, you can obviously see the trends as they move up from the elementary
Right.
school, but I'm not
Yeah,
sure
we
those
might
are.
have, you know, FY '24 might be a lower year, but not much longer than that.
Right.
Because you're right, the elementary schools are going to be bringing you gifts, yes.
And one of the things I was going to mention as part of the legislative update, because it is budget impacting, is as a result of new legislation, the districts are now responsible for special education costs for students until they reach the age of 22. So it used to be the age of 21, but the recent legislation shifted that and extended it through turning 21 and through to your 22nd birthday. So that would be unplanned in every district across the state.
Yes.
And I guess my question, moving later in the agenda, is how that affects us going forward. But,
Okay.
you know, it's things like that, you know, are unanticipated and,
Sure. Well, we can budget for it going forward.
yes,
in the
yes, for
future.
this year,
Yes, but I don't
definitely.
think it will be too significant this year.
Okay, that's good to know.
What was the driver in the transportation?
It's related to students moving out of the district
Okay.
mostly.
Transportation for special ed or transportation in general?
Oh, that number, transportation is almost all, well, yeah, it is all. No, I guess there was maybe a little bit regular ed, but most of that number is special ed.
Great.
Can you give us a little bit of background on the facilities number and the facilities?
The facilities number, that's primarily unfilled positions.
Okay. So the unfilled positions really applies to across the
All over
board?
Yeah, it's 254,000 across the board, not counting special ed, that I lumped into special ed, but it's significant there as well, yes.
Okay.
Great.
And those unfilled positions are needed, because we've got our facilities director cleaning toilets, and we've got our special ed, our director of student services was in RMMS all day one of these weeks, helping out, so, you know, it's affecting us. It's not like we don't need those positions.
I have a question. Do we have in archives the equivalent version of this going back, say, 10 years?
10 years? No, because this is unique to me, being the VA.
Okay.
So 5
I mean, because
years.
this topic comes year after year, when we give back a lot of money back to the district. And so the question is there any way to analyze it over a longer period of time to see if there's any trend on the drivers that tend to be the categories? I mean, I know every year is different,
It is.
but there may be some trends where there are some unique things, like maybe related to COVID, but there may be other things. And so the question is, are we maybe over budgeting some areas or not? I don't know. I just want to understand if there are any trends hidden, or, you know, if you extract the numbers.
Sure, I understand what you're saying. I
so-
mean, I would say that we're not over budgeting.
Okay.
I would say that this is definitely there are reasons for
Right.
this that we don't anticipate.
And by the way, I thank you very much, and I support what you're doing. I mean, it's great to be in this position, really.
Oh, yes.
I would say up until, through these COVID years, I would say any of the unreserved fund balances that kind of come to mind, I mean, I have to kind of go back through presentations and things like that, were really driven by special education. I know we had another significant year where we had significant levels of attrition. So we saw a large number of long-term staff leave, not necessarily retire, but just leave the district. And if they're on the higher end of the salary schedule, we definitely replaced them with teachers with, in some cases, less experience, and we resulted in significant savings that way. But really, I can go back, and I have a trend file now that we have the number of what's returned. I can update that, the Excel spreadsheet I did of the 10-year,
Yeah.
and it has the view to 10 or 12 years ago, and it's split between Hollis and Brookline. It includes the elementary K-6 districts, and gives us a good overview, so I can take this and
If
and
nothing
update
else, that
it.
would be a good educational input to the district meetings in March, just to kind of show and educate the public on the drivers here.
I only get 10 minutes to educate anybody.
I will make
So-
every effort to make sure you get half an hour.
I don't think we need a half an hour. But anyone else have any other questions?
This is excellent, thank you very
Yeah,
much.
no, this is great, and
Yeah.
thank you so much, I know it's a busy time of year, and there's a lot taking place, and appreciate you getting this together, because it wasn't available to the school board for their meeting a couple weeks ago, so I appreciate the effort that went into
We're
putting this
special.
together.
You are the first one to get any financials for the end of the year, so yes, you are special.
Well, thank you. We'll move on to the school board update. Cindy, I shared with everyone the link to the meeting, and Dawn shared the draft minutes as a result, so I
We
don't
didn't
know.
really have any financial thing other than we went ahead and said that Andy could apply for the building aid. I mean, that
Yeah,
was-
do you mind talking about the building aid a little bit?
I don't know if I can talk to it, maybe Kelly can talk to it better. I mean,
Yeah, I can answer
because they're
questions.
probably, they've been putting their stamp and looking at it even since we've had stuff.
I guess that was just for me to gain an understanding of what, because it seemed like from the minutes that you talked about, or like a dual approach, an HBMS and an HBHS version of initiatives or things that needed to be addressed, and was looking to the board for approval of how to move forward. And maybe, Kelly, can you take just a couple minutes to explain like that? Because building aid hasn't been available
Right.
for our more recent projects in any of the districts until recently. So maybe can you just spend a couple minutes
Yeah,
talking
sure.
about that?
And we applied for building aid in Brookline and in the co-op as well, not in Hollis because they've been using bonds for several years now, so they are not part of that. But we decided to sort of jump on the fact that it is available now and go with some of the projects that we've started talking about. We haven't fleshed any of them out completely, but we did flesh them out enough to make the application. And so we have some, the biggest one is in the co-op is for the high school to expand the cafeteria, because as you all know, that's a tiny space for our students. So that would be redoing some of the kitchen and making that a bigger space so it goes out into where the delivery area is right now and over this way as well. And that's probably the biggest change. And there's some other changes in moving things around a bit so that the high school robotics can come back up to the high school.
Right, so
itself.
are we leaning toward a plan similar to the one from a couple of years ago that was like creating a second-story space
No,
near the mini
we're
gyms
not
and
doing
things like
at
that?
all. That wasn't even in the mix this time around. It's focused on sort of trying to be ready for expansion if we have more students. So it's turning more spaces into usable classroom spaces and sort of expanding in the middle school some of the spaces we have, updating them and making them more useful, the library would be one of those spots here in middle school that we'd sort of cut this in half and make one of the halves more of a flex space for students, and the other half would be the library. And then a lot of it is replacing boilers and things that will make us more energy
Infrastructure.
efficient. With a lot of that equipment is at the end of life in both schools. I mean, we just did the HVAC replacement in the high school, or we're still doing it. But that's only part of the equipment that needs to be replaced. So it's sort of a dual thing, an enrollment, getting ready for an increase in enrollment, and looking at end-of-life equipment and energy efficiency. So
Okay.
So, how would you do the expansion of those spaces in the high school? Are you talking about adding on to the building? Are you talking about redoing some of the spaces that are there? What's
No.
the take part of, or
Well,
the give
part
part?
of the cafeteria expansion frees up some space, so there's a classroom or two right there. So it's not huge amounts of classroom space in the middle school and the high school. It's more reconfiguring some of the spaces that we have to make them more useful for classrooms.
And so for the process itself, it is an application process. It
Yes.
isn't like you make your request and everybody gets it. It's
Oh,
a
no.
limited pool of funds. There's a substantial application that's required,
Oh, yes.
that your project is, I guess, rated and ranked
is.
using their system, involves site visits and things like that. And depending on the projects and whether the approved projects that rise to the top then get approved in their communities, there's some shifting that can take place. But as the process goes on, you do need more kind of fleshed out plans.
Yes.
So,
Well, the first part of the process is to know whether we're moving forward, right?
Well,
After the
that-
site visits or something.
That is the hope. We have had the site visits, so we are.
Oh, that's great.
Definitely in the mix. And as I understand it, if you weren't approved for it this cycle, you would be on the list for the next cycle. So, yeah, I'm not clear as to when they will make those decisions. But,
right.
hopefully it's in enough time that we can move forward with something for for March voting. And, I mean, that's the plan. I mean, I'm sure we'll start talking about it both in Brookline and in the co-op, whether or not we got the funding or not, because we do want to be ready to put something forward if that's the case.
Because in the case, if we were awarded the potential to get it, you would be able to put forward a warrant article that says, we're receiving 30% of the funding
Yes.
through the state building aid fund, and the remainder to be financed
Exactly.
as approved.
Exactly.
Would there
And-
be national aid for energy efficiency type projects, or?
No, I don't think so. It's just building it.
And
Okay.
I don't recall, did they announce the cap of the amount like that's available in total? Like at one point it was like $50 million, at another, there were,
They may have, but
I
I'm not
haven't,
aware what that
I'm not
is.
aware of what it is.
Yeah, I don't remember Andy saying anything about what the cap would be.
Yeah, I don't
Okay.
remember. There may be one, but I'm not aware of it, so. But we are somewhat ahead of the game because we had started talking about these things last year. So we do have an architect involved, we have a contractor involved, so I think we can start talking about what the plans are and flesh them out more seriously.
Right, and so did the board give its approval to move forward for both, for the
Yes.
projects at each
Yes.
school?
Because they're not combined, they're separate. So it could be that the middle school would get approved and the high school wouldn't.
Right,
So,
there's 4
yeah.
applications. Yeah.
Okay,
So,
okay.
yeah, they did them separately, but we did approve for him. I mean, there's no harm, right? I mean,
Yeah.
our understanding and his understanding, and Kelly's understanding is if we lose out this year because we're already in the queue, we get considered next year.
Right.
So there's really no downside to it. But that was the only thing that we did, as you probably saw in public comments, we did have the manager or supervisor of the kitchen from the high school spoke. She's concerned about retaining staff at the rates that, the current salary rate that we have. So that was, we didn't really discuss that a whole lot at that meeting, but that was brought forth to us.
And at this point, moving into the budget, we do not have any, we have like the next year of the HESA agreement, but it's an already negotiated contract, so this, we'd be in the,
Yes.
putting forward to like the second or third year?
It's the third year.
The third year, and the HEA
Is the
collective
same.
bargaining unit
Right.
has already been Sandbernized and is, we won't be
Right.
putting anything
However,
forward for
I will
that.
say that the board members met today with the union, and they are talking about what to do with salaries this year. It will likely be a retention bonus, and then there's the potential, just in discussions now, that they may open up the contract and negotiate.
Like a
for-
sidebar.
Yeah, a sidebar or something.
Mhm.
But we are talking with the union, yes.
And the
Okay.
retention bonus was gonna be ESSER funds for
Yes, it
this
will be
year.
funded by ESSER funds that we have left. Yes.
Because the concern is they're gonna lose some of the, older staff.
Mhm.
If we have to hire in younger staff at a different level.
Mhm.
And they are down staff anyway.
Oh, yes,
Support staff is really kind of suffering.
yep.
Yeah, there are various districts across the state that are using their ESSER funding for those types of retention of bonuses and
Yep.
things like that, so. Okay,
Any discussion about coaches? I know we're down to about 10 or 11 coaches at the high school.
There wasn't really, Brian wasn't at the meeting, so there wasn't really any discussion on it.
Probably the same situation as the understaffed too. Just
Right, I
No,
believe
second.
We talked about fixing
Yeah.
some type of table,
Right.
but that hasn't been approved or anything.
No, I think
right, like
that
to address like longevity and pay
Right, yep.
slightly higher
Yes.
stipends to
we are
coaches.
discussing that.
But that doesn't help any new coach that we would be looking for, so.
But I think some of the stipends were higher than they are right now in that discussion, not just longevity, but.
Not just, so there was some
I think
incremental
so.
movement. Mhm.
I'm a little surprised there's not more interest in seeing people more flexible work schedules.
That's true, yeah.
I think there'd be an opportunity to people to schedule themselves around practices.
And the new field is open. I do know some people that have been able to do it because they can practice on the field at a later time.
Right, right. You can close it down.
Otherwise, we may be in worse shape than we are right now, even as far
That's
as,
true,
yeah.
Mhm.
just like with the coaches.
Just a question on that. How are we fixed right now for being staffed with teachers? Are we looking for substitutes, or where do we sit with that?
Well, we're fully staffed with teachers right now, I believe. I don't think there's any openings at the moment, but, the problem is we don't have any substitutes either. So no one can be sick.
And we always have some maternity at some
Oh, yes,
point
we
during the
always
year.
have those kind of things.
Darn.
So that's gonna be the challenge, is to fill a position when a teacher's out for just being sick a day, or in a maternity, or a medical leave, or something like that, because that is very challenging.
Is the difficulty with getting substitutes, getting qualified substitutes, or is it a pay problem, or how are we fixed for?
I believe
Compensation.
our substitute pay is relatively on par with other districts. I don't think it's bottom of the barrel by any means. Obviously, if we paid more, we might get better luck, but I think it's really the bodies, they just aren't there.
Because I was thinking we must have teachers that retire that might be interested
Yes.
in substituting, but not at a substitute pay grade.
We have one teacher that is doing that right now. He came back, and he's a long-term sub right now. We have another teacher that did retire and has come back full-time. And we have, like in Brookline, we have one that's it's a partial retirement, so she works part-time. So those things are
Yeah.
happening, but, unfortunately, they're not happening as much as.
Right, and
we thought.
as retirees, there are limitations as well as to how many hours they can work and things like that, and still maintain their retirement benefits through NHRS, so. A lot of different moving parts to make all of that work.
There really are, and, we work extensively to fill positions. I take that back, we do have the tech ed position here in this school that is open right now, so I think that's the only one.
Tech ed is, what is that kind of course? It's a highly skilled tech.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really good on
I mean,
that, Cindy.
it took, I mean, the tech ed took over what was wood shop and the,
Right,
so there, I haven't really seen this person that came in 2 years ago, I
Yeah.
guess. I think he incorporated more than just wood shop
he
type.
definitely
Yeah.
did. He
Yeah,
has
there
a lot of
were-
equipment
Yeah, and there
so-
were like design projects online and things like that. My son
Right.
had him for the 2 years, so.
He's got a machine that will laser cut things, so that's one of the
CNC
things.
work down there.
Yeah, the robotics team uses that as well, but, yeah, it's more specialized than the wood shop was, but it's the same concept.
I didn't know the term.
Yeah.
Yeah, wood shop. Okay, great. Well, thank you. I appreciate the update. And we were kind of timely. We were able to see the draft minutes and everything, so we're up to date with that regard. One of the things I didn't mention at the August meeting, I had sent an email to Kelly saying, oh, I'll take care of that at the meeting, no problem, and left the meeting like, totally skipped the SAU Budget Subcommittee, and it was the purpose for my email to all of you, just kind of looking for input if anyone was interested to be the representative. I'm happy to step in and take care of it as our committee's representative, and I apologize for not bringing it out at the meeting. Like it was that afternoon. I said, oh yeah, Kelly, no problem, I'll take care of that.
Well, I
It'll
didn't
be great.
exactly remember either, so.
So tomorrow, again, with just the way the meeting worked out, usually we don't, I'm not able to share a view of the SAU budget with the draft view at this point, but based on the timing with the delay of our meeting this month and the upcoming meeting, which is a Zoom meeting tomorrow morning of the SAU Budget Subcommittee, I was able to share a draft version of the SAU budget with you. And just kind of to refresh everybody's memory, the SAU Budget Subcommittee is comprised of a member of each school board in the SAU, the governing board, and a member of each budget or finance committee, as well as members of the administration, which include Kelly, Linda Sherwood, who's the assistant BA, Gina, and Andy. So for the Hollis Budget Committee, Mike Harris is the representative, and I know Mike and I have been on the committee for a long time. I'm not sure Kelly, can you run through the whole membership of?
Sure, Brian is
Oh.
representing the finance committee for Brookline.
Great, you've been doing it for a while too.
Now I have to remember, Krista is the co-op representative for the school board. Allison Mersano is for Brookline, and, Carol Roy is the
Oh, okay.
Hollis representative.
Okay. A lot of those members have been coming back annually as representatives on the committee, so it's a good group. And the meetings have been by Zoom, and that really does kind of help everyone's schedule. I know you were looking for an in-person meeting, but
That's
Zoom
right.
just makes it a lot easier. So we have not had an overview of the budget, and I shared it so that you can get kind of a sneak peek. I don't want to ask Kelly to go through it yet because we, haven't had the first meeting of the subcommittee. I can run through just a couple of, highlights of the things I noticed, and then would just ask if you do have any questions. I can bring those to the committee rather than have Kelly answer them this evening. I would prefer to wait to tomorrow if we have questions this evening and bring those to the committee for discussion kind of in general, if that's okay with everybody. So the budget that is being presented in this first draft, we do go through a couple of drafts prior to the public hearing with the governing board that usually takes place in December, so that they have a public hearing and an approved budget before we start the new year. And that, of course, the way the SAU budget works is it gets apportioned between the 3 districts, and each district's piece of the budget is put into a warrant article. It's the only time you get to vote twice on something if you attend the meetings or vote on election day, because you would vote for the SAU budget in either Hollis or Brookline, and then you would vote again on the co-op portion of it. So the budget being put forward with this first view is a 4.6% increase from the current budget for FY23. It's predominantly a budget that addresses the salaries and benefits for the central office staff. There usually aren't a lot of requests for additional items. I think we're looking at this year, a request for a portable conference room, a replacement oil tank, and yes, that kind of salary and benefit adjustments that normally take place. At one point, the Hollis School District had been considering renovation to the SAU building because they are the kind of owner of the building, and those kind of discussions have ebbed and flowed, and there is no plan at this point for a renovation. I think the only things taking place include some interior renovations to the bathroom
Yes.
to make that more usable. But that's not something kind of addressed here in this budget.
And what about that barn behind the building?
It's still standing, and that's where it's going to be.
And years ago, there was the mold issue. I said, that was fixed. Does that ever come back, or?
You mean in the Hollis schools or in the?
No, the mold issue on that barn behind your SAU building.
I don't remember any mold issues. That must be before me.
Should have been from the rats.
Yeah.
Years ago, we had to not have the haunted house because we used to store a lot of the equipment there.
Oh,
And we had, we went to use it one year, and we had mold, and so we had to, that was canceled. And then we had to go through a major process of cleaning every board that we had stored there, a piece of wood.
oh, wow.
No, that's before me.
Oh.
So
recall
I
that,
would be in
yeah.
favor of refurbishing the barn, okay?
Well, we tried.
Yes,
but
not a
didn't-
conversation for
Okay.
that's, direct that back to the Hollis School
All
Board, because they're the owners of record, resides in with the Hollis District.
it
as the-
additional
As the
office space.
landlord, as the landlord,
Well, you tried.
yeah, yeah.
That was tried before?
Well,
On
there
that
were,
building?
there was, yeah, there was a plan, there were several plans for the, but there was, I think there was a problem, was that the one that wasn't,
Yes.
yes, so we, not this past cycle, the cycle before, the Hollis School District was moving forward with a plan. And as you know, all the plans and meeting notices all have posting requirements, which the district followed. Unfortunately, the newspaper didn't follow through as they said they would, and because things weren't noticed correctly, they couldn't bring forward the article for vote at the district level. So unfortunately, it derailed the process, and other things have taken kind of a priority, and it hasn't come back yet, so,
But you're right, absolutely right, that something needs to be done about that.
Yeah.
yeah.
The SAU offices.
So maybe the need for a portable conference room will kind of start that discussion again, which is something that's addressed in this SAU budget. The first draft was a view we did not, well, I'm calling this the first draft, but there was a preliminary draft that managed among the administration that had a higher increase, closer to 5.8%. This one is at 4.6%. And it's the first time we're getting a little bit of a glimpse of where we think GMR might be, because the benefits included right now stand at a 5% increase. We don't know yet. It's one of the finer points that'll
Seems like
kind
a
of.
bargain.
It does, and it would be nice. So we'll have to
Don't
see
be
if
too
we can,
excited, though.
if we can hold that line. And for the first time in, I think I've been on the Budget Committee for probably 12 years or so, I cannot remember a year that there were, a two-year cycle where there was a decrease in both the NHRS rates for employees and teachers. So factored into the SAU budget, as well as will factor into the FY24 budget, and decrease in the NHRS rates for employees those are like the hourly staff, like paraprofessionals, administrative assistants, things, and custodians, things like that, of 14.06% to 13.53%. And for the professional staff, a decrease from 21.02% to 19.64%. So those are nice, sizable decreases, and those are factored into the budget as well. So I don't know if anyone has any questions that you'd like me to bring to Brian to bring to the meeting tomorrow. We'll have an overview and get some more kind of details about the percentage increases. Typically, they're in that kind of 3.5% range. The administrator salaries usually have a range in value, and Kelly puts together the budget, and we kind of keep it right or tagged to that 3 to 3.5% range. No new staff is being requested, and they're just going to move along. So there is a fund balance at the SAU budget level. It's the only portion of the school budgets that can actually retain the difference between budgets and actuals at the end of a school year, without, or like using a retained fund balance or anything like that. So if there is a difference between the two, or an underrun that takes place every year, that gets put aside and held as an unreserved fund balance. The governing board actively manages to keep that fund balance in a like 7 to 10% range of the budget, and right now it looks like it's in the 9.5% range. It'll dip a little bit moving into FY24. So their unreserved fund balance looks to be about a little over $200,000 at this point.
So the 3.5 or 4% increase that you mentioned does that include the reserve fund balance, or that?
No, that doesn't include the use of the reserve fund balance
Okay.
in the calculation of the increase. The governing board could make a decision to withdraw funds from the unreserved fund
Yeah.
balance as an offset.
Okay.
Or
But
it could
that's
be a recommendation of the subcommittee to do that if we're interested in trying to keep the percentage a little bit lower, because there's a percentage that the budget changes, just like the way our budget changes.
Right.
And then it's how it's funded. And so if part of it is funded through use of the fund balance, that kind of reduces kind of the tax effort of the budget itself.
Okay.
So right now, it doesn't look like it's only like $1,500 to reduce expenses. So the SAU budget subcommittee has, in some cases, made recommendations to say, oh, we'd like you to use some more fund balance to, drop that kind of tax effort percentage, and that net percentage increase is a little bit lower. But right now, it's conservatively at $1,500 coming out of their unreserved fund balance. So, any other questions? Or it's kind of an uneventful budget. We had a lot of discussion last year, obviously, because there was the new position being requested and things like that. I would imagine potentially at the public hearing there might be some questions about how that job is, how the district is utilizing that position, and things to kind of just have that public discussion about it. But this is where we're kind of starting. Okay. And so as this process moves along, there'll be another view based on our discussion tomorrow, and then there'll be a draft presentation of what will be presented at the public hearing. And typically it includes like the appropriate financials and organization chart, so that people can kind of have an understanding of who's who and what positions are in the central office. And that information, as I said, I will share with you and will be presented at a public hearing in December. Okay. Great. So moving on, we're moving right along. Moving on, I know that I think at the end of last meeting, I did mention that I thought I would have an opportunity to put together some information about available data at the DOE website, and unfortunately, I just haven't had an opportunity to do that. But what I can do is send some links subsequent to this meeting, just to kind of direct you to some different areas of the Department of Education website that has good comparative data for our district to other districts, and just good general information on adequacy, enrollment levels, student-teacher ratios, a ranking of, or a listing of salaries of the administrators in each district. There's just a lot of good general information that's there, cost per student information. The DRA also has some good places to go, so I think a better way for me to convey that might be to kind of give you some links to that, and you can kind of peruse that at your leisure. I know I do use, I reference the cost per student information, and the DRA produces the adequacy information, which is incredibly, incredibly helpful. There's just a lot of good data there, so. It's historical, it goes back several years, and there is a platform, and it's a little bit hard to find, but once you find it, it's good information because you can compare our districts side by side to another district and kind of just see how expenses shake out at a high level and things like that. So it's kind of just good general information. But with regard to the FY '24 budget planning that I've corrected in our agenda, just to kind of review the dates and deliverables. So really, next month is really, we kind of get into the guidance aspect for the budget and have a discussion and have come up with a view for preliminary guidance by the end of October's, the meeting in October. That gives the business office and administration some direction of where, as a budget committee, we kind of feel that the budget should come in, and of course gives us kind of that initial view of those things and those larger projects that we might be looking at. There's a lot of information that comes in the October, November, and December time period, like adequacy estimates for our state aid, enrollment levels, the tax rate gets set, which leads to some information on how we can project the tax base going forward when we eventually get to that part of the calculation after we've determined a budget. Kelly provides iterative views with new items and you know, how, and shows a good progression of how the initial starting budget with the administration kind of isn't even the first budget that we get. They might go through it 2 or 3 times before we even see it. But there's always a progression included in our file, and there's just a lot of information that really does come in kind of a short period of time. So we'll then look to, depending on how that sidebar goes, we'll obviously share that information probably by the January timeframe and see a public hearing in early February and then a meeting in March. And Kelly, you usually kind of look to that calendar between the view Tom Guillen puts together on the Hollis Budget Committee side, and everything gets passed through legal to kind of make sure dates and snow dates and deliberative session dates and public hearing dates are all kind of in alignment and tied to the RSAs. So,
We should have that in October.
yeah, so that'll give us a good sense. But that's generally kind of, you know, follows a pretty a pattern that we're kind of all familiar with. So I don't know at this point if there's really anything more significant projects that were, you know, other than we, you know, consistently see textbooks and, you know, kind of those, we had a facilities overview, so we would anticipate some facilities items and things like that. Not sure if you're looking at new staffing and things like that, but we'll get a sense of that.
Yeah, there are a few positions, I think they're mostly special ed positions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that's where we stand. Does anyone have any questions about that planning process or some other?
I have
I have a couple of things.
a comment or a question. And I don't know whether this is our responsibility or your responsibility. I like the idea. I mean, I know that we've had this discussion numerous times before us, you know, zero-based budgeting, whether you use the last year's budget as a starting point or whether we go to the actuals and use that as a starting point. And I know we've had calculations and compare the two in the past, and it's been the difference has been insignificant. But is that something that we should be doing every year? Should
Yeah.
we just?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I would be comfortable if I see a set of numbers or recommendations, especially on a sheet like this, that has the actual versus where, so at least at a top level view, we can begin to identify where are the areas that are increasing, and mentally, we can say, well, it's not a COVID year anymore, and therefore this makes sense, and we go through that kind of analytical exercise to figure out whether the numbers are reasonable or not. And having the actuals as a starting point provides a slightly different perspective than just using last year's budget as a starting point.
Well, we don't use last year's budget as a starting point. The departments put in what they,
Yeah, I'm familiar with how they've done that before.
Right.
You know, at the teacher level, they basically go in and submit a request based on
Right.
their needs, and then
Right.
you aggregate it and so on.
right, so we don't really start with last year's budget. We build it from nothing, in my mind. We're not looking, oh, well, they had $500, so they're gonna get $500 again. We don't do it that way. And then we have the new item spreadsheet, which is all new, that has nothing to do with last year's budget. So I'm not really sure how I would approach that any differently.
Well, just keep on doing what you're doing, and then,
Isn't that kind
if,
of like,
you know, we'll go along, you know?
isn't that kind of like starting off from zero? When this year, we're looking at zero, we're looking at all of the items that we need to have into the budget. So even though it's not built from last year, it's built from this year, so it's kind of a zero-based budgeting, unless I'm mistaken on that.
Ultimately, we compare what you provide
Yeah.
with some starting reference point that we calculate based on some starting point. And the starting point is usually either last year's budget number or maybe some actuals or maybe something in between.
I think they usually provide us with the actuals from the previous year. I mean, when
Right,
when we
which
get
we
the
have,
spreadsheet,
yeah.
they usually give us the budget and the actuals from the previous year and the proposed budget for the
Yeah,
new
and
year. So we have both of
it's
those.
over 700 lines of data. So,
Are we confusing that with the multiplier?
yeah, it's like we're kind of like, so the point of giving a preliminary guidance view in October, and we do call it preliminary guidance, it gives that initial view, is because we generally have a tentative view as we go into that October meeting, but if we didn't, it gives us an opportunity to look at the budget, the actuals, make adjustments, and give that kind of anticipation of, here's where we think it should be. So like, we would expect through the guidance view to say, oh, look, we're seeing a reduction in NHRS, so we would expect to, this is gonna go down and this is gonna go up and
Or
things
we're
like
seeing an
that.
inflation factor so much. that
Right, and we
expect-
have a
right,
conversation about that, where
Yeah.
when we were looking at inflation, when it was, minuscule, and we were putting in zeros as inflation factors, it's a different conversation as we look for, looking into this year based on the economy and things like that. So we have that conversation, and we'll get a budget view, and then we use that kind of October to November window to do that kind of individual analysis and looking at those lines. Whether you want to look at 700 discrete lines, they collapse to broader categories, and if you want to trend and look at, a 3 to 5 year, variance and see if it's kind of going in the right way in your mind and raise those questions, that's what we expect to kind of talk about in November. And then by the end of November's meeting, say, okay, final guidance, this is where we are, this is where we're hoping that, we see the budget come in. So, we kind of, I feel like we kind of do that.
Yeah, okay.
But it's hard to talk about without having the budget, and that isn't an indictment in any way, Kelly, that we would have expected to see it or anything like that. But it is hard to kind of talk through the FY '24 view when we're sitting in FY '23 and our actuals are from FY '22. So that's always the, how you manage that. So you can take the FY '22 actuals. So when there are two summaries I typically include in the guidance file. One that follows that kind of guidance multiplier effect and adds things in and has one starting point. And then the other starting point says, okay, let's take those actuals from FY '22 and let's add in all the things we know are taking place in FY '23.
Right.
Like we know we had a new contract, or it was another contract year, and here are what those costs were. And we know we had more more special education items or things like that. And those are the comparisons that we did to say, okay, looking at it two ways, is one way better than the other? And in the 2 years I've done it, they've come relatively close.
Now, to this point, should we consider having an off-site meeting for us to, as a team, to kind of go through that exercise, independently of what they're doing, but before the next official meeting where we're gonna talk about and try to set up a budget guidance?
Well, the
In
way.
other words, instead of doing things individually and coming up with our own ideas, maybe it's worthwhile to have a team meeting to kind of discuss this and get everybody's opinion or everybody's thoughts on it. That's all. I mean, I don't know if that's needed or not at this point.
Well, I'll open that up to the,
But that's kind of what we
Committee.
do at our regular meeting,
right.
is, we discuss those. It's just, it's
Right,
a
and when-
public
and when I
meeting. It
said
has to be
kind
a
of-
public meeting regardless.
Right, and when I said
We're
to,
getting
like, you take
together.
the budget after we receive it and kind of do your own analysis, and those are the things, some of us might focus more on salary items, some might, and while we're looking at the budget in total, some might focus on various, like, special education or transportation or things like that, while you're looking and assessing things in total. So that's for you to be able to kind of come up with those questions
yeah.
that we bring back and ask Kelly, well, why are we seeing this go up or this go down, or I would have expected this or that. And I don't know if having another meeting would be helpful in that
No,
regard,
I think
or-
it'd be the same as this. I mean, we're a quorum at that point. I mean, it's,
It has
Yeah.
to be a public meeting,
yes.
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah, no, it would have to be noticed and everything
I'd
else,
like
so.
to throw in a thought. Seems like whenever we have these meetings and they end up to the public meetings, that we're comparing ourselves against ourselves in previous years and trying to justify our position this year and what we're doing. It may be unfair because, like you say, the circumstances change, special ed change, transportation change, whatever might be a factor. The town may not see it that way. They see numbers change, and why is it going up by such? Why are we getting so much back? Does that mean you made a mistake by over budgeting? I looked last year at comparative towns. It hit me that we were doing very well compared to other towns when you look at their cost per student. And even though they may not be identical, we can look at percentages, we can look at different factors and say, well, we can sample it so that it compares to us. And that might be an interesting shot when we pass things over for public opinion, that not only are we doing pretty well by our estimations in comparison to last year and seeing the differences, but based on other communities, similar size and so on, we're doing much better. And that's, to me, a real comparison.
Yeah, no, that's all,
Instead of
that's,
beating ourselves over the head about and trying to justify ups and downs, that people would have to sit in our meetings to understand what it is that we're doing. They're not gonna do it, but they'll be there to question.
But the towns are always thrilled when we return large amounts of money, so that's,
Yeah, we gotta pass. But some years it may not be that way.
yes.
And
We
then
have to justify
it's
that,
still
yeah.
looking at other communities, maybe they had similar situations for the same reasons, like
Yeah.
whatever, inflation, the cost of energy, or whatever it might be.
Another thing that we need to keep in mind is, we provide a guidance here, but we've been known in the past to adjust that guidance later on as we get more information too.
For sure.
So it's not cast into stone, it's, here's your initial target, and then we may come back and change the target later on.
Yeah.
right,
So
because at that
it's-
point, we've had an opportunity to review the discrete lines of the budget and then
Yep.
kind of, draw some conclusions and
Yeah,
things
so
like
if this is
that,
just
so.
the start of a multi-step process, it's not the end point.
And that first view that you're gonna see, there's still a lot of unanswered questions in there. And,
Right.
like, how many people are retiring, we
Right,
don't
right,
know.
right, we don't know that.
Right.
Okay?
Okay, I guess one of the items we've talked about as we've had just a couple of meetings, and this involves outside of the operating budget, those additional warrant articles. As we came through last year's cycle, we thought that Special Education Trust Fund kind of leveled out to the prior number we had identified probably 4 or 5 years ago. And we had a a kind of high-level discussion about whether that amount was the right place for it to be based on changes in costs of out-of-district placements and things like that. So I would just be interested as we kind of go through this budget cycle in what the, recommendation is for that, that cap
Yep.
on that amount at this point. And then the other thing, this is just a topic of conversation, and we could potentially make a recommendation to the school board, is the retained fund balance. So the retained fund balance is the only way that the school districts have, excluding the SAU budget, of keeping in reserve the funds that are not utilized at the end of the year, a portion of the unreserved fund balance. At last year's meeting, through a petition warrant article, there was some conversation about what's allowable and not allowable. And right now, the percentage deemed by the legislature as a maximum that can be retained is 5% of the district assessment. Our district is at 1%, because when the initial the initial RSA was passed, 2.5% was the maximum, and at a district meeting, there was an amendment to the warrant, and 1% passed. So the district has been at 1%. In an environment where we have returned substantial amounts of money, and do see significant projects in the future, it's worth considering. It would have been nice during the COVID years to have some additional funds available, because the district just doesn't have the Title I free and reduced lunch percentage that drove a lot of that ESSER funding and federal funding back to the district. So I think if you were to look at other districts of comparable size with the number of students or schools that we have, even at the SAU in total, Hollis, Brookline, and the co-op receive substantially fewer funds than other districts, because the free and reduced price percentage was really the basis for most of the allocations. Anyway, the point of this topic is to just raise among ourselves if we think it's worth putting together or recommending to the school board that a warrant article be introduced that increases the percentage for the retained fund balance. So for me, the advantage of putting that forward, whether it passes or fails, is that it's something directly in the warrant issued by the school board with the recommendation for or against by the budget committee, and it isn't something that gets brought up through a petition that you get 5 minutes to speak about and things like that. It's something that rose to the level of importance for our district to address, and really put our kind of fiduciary responsibility ahead of in line with what we're presenting, and whether it's worth a conversation of maybe not necessarily going to the full 5%, because that might be a lot for people to accept in these circumstances, but maybe moving it to 2.5%, which is at least the limit of the first RSA that went through. So I'd be happy to have a conversation about that if you think it's worth a recommendation to the school board, and just kind of get everybody's perspective.
So make your recommendation again, you say you said a lot there.
Sorry, to put forward, to make a recommendation to the school board to put forward a warrant article that increases the retained fund balance from 1 to 2.5%.
Now, what would be the actual number based on that?
It would raise our amount.
$25 million budget.
Well,
so-
it's not
It's
based
not
on the
that-
budget.
It's not? Okay,
No,
what is
it's
it?
based-
The retained fund balance for FY '22, or that we, going into this year, was 189,000, I think.
Right, so that would, at 2.5%, it would put it in the kind of $470,000 range. And just because you identify that amount doesn't mean it's automatically that amount. So there's a recommendation by the administration to the school board as they've evaluated the financials and things like that, and they put a recommendation forward. So right now, Kelly's recommendation has been to max out the 1%, to retain that $189,000. Were we at 2.5%, you have more latitude. So in a year, where there is more money, maybe we consider doing it, or we don't. I mean, we leave it to the kind of professional evaluation of the budget and the needs of the district that the administration has always put forward, but it just gives us a little bit more latitude and equates it to the percentage that the other districts have in the SAU 41. So Hollis's retained fund balance is at 2.5%, and Brookline's is as well. So,
So what's the process for using the funds that are in the retained fund
It
balance?
has to be a public hearing,
Uh-huh.
and so that would go through the school board, and we would have to say, school board, this is how we want to use it, and then they would approve it.
Okay, is there any approval process through the state, or is it
Not
just?
anymore.
Not
It used
anymore.
to be that way.
Okay.
It's not anymore.
yeah, it used to be, the only reason you could use the funds were for emergencies, special education or emergencies, or to reduce the tax rate. And you had to appeal, you had to get approval of budget committees and school boards and make your appeal to the department, or probably the DRA, through the DOE and get it approved and whatnot. And we actually did use that process. The first year it was approved, there were some issues with our water tanks and some things that took place over the
Elevator,
summer.
maybe, I don't
And
know.
maybe it was the elevator as well. There were definitely two things. And without knowing what we were facing for the year, the previous business administrator, we went through the kind of that whole process. So that was the last time we used it, but it is, it can be
It's
used.
a contingency fund.
It is and we don't have the $100,000 contingency in the budget. So that's another discussion of whether we want to institute that $100,000 line item again. We've had it up until the past is this 2 years? Now, this is the second, the current budget we're in now is the second year without one. So some of the arguments put forward was that, oh yeah, well, you can have a contingency line item. Well, we don't. And if we want to have one, that's also a warrant. So it isn't a line that Kelly can just add in. It's a warrant article of what the amount, and that has to be approved as well. And there's an RSA that governs the wording of that warrant article. So
You can fund
thanks
it.
for bringing that up. So it's actually twofold. We can consider adding a warrant for the contingency and/or increasing the retained fund balance.
And the contingency can be funded by a fund balance, or it can be funded by the budget. For
Exactly.
instance, Hollis does it by the budget, and you guys have
We
always
have
done
a-
it by fund balance.
Right.
It's like semantics.
Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a matter of semantics. What you're doing is putting money in reserve one way or another. And I would rather use a formula like 2.5%. We know what the number is. What was it, 190,000? So it comes up to 470.
And it would vary a little bit every year.
Every year.
It varies with the level of the
And
assessment
then
and things like
then it
that.
stays at that level.
No, it has to be approved annually. You
So
can't
annually-
add to it. Because the percentage is targeted off of the assessment, and the assessment changes annually, the attribution has to be approved annually, and if you don't approve it, you can't keep it. So it has to be kind of acknowledged
All
and,
right, well,
So
then
if-
that's fine too, because then the taxpayers would get it
You
back.
can amend it.
Right.
yeah,
So if we had this in place,
which
that-
this.
the 400, and the 20, the 5%,
Yeah.
which is, would
Well-
be roughly 471,397.
Well, no, that's 2.5. If it were 5%,
Oh, yeah,
it would
2.5,
be.
right, right. So
you
let's
know.
assume we had the 2.5. That would be a threshold, and in theory, if we had needs, you could go to this 1.5 that we gave back to the district and take a portion of that to fill that
That's
bucket.
exactly
how it
what,
would
that's
be
how it
funded.
works.
That's
That's how
it
it
is funded.
That's how
So
it
having
works.
said this, I would feel more comfortable with the concept in practice if we had, for example, a history of over the last X number of years, how much retained fund balance we have used for purposes before we ended up with a net amount we returned to the district.
Used for purposes, can
We-
you define that?
The elevator, or maybe we need to do a
Okay.
study on something else.
So we've never used the only time we petitioned to use the retained fund balance was that first year, and it was at a minimal amount of money. And actually, if I remember correctly, there was some, because it was a new process, it was unclear whether we were actually ever authorized for it, and we ended up by the end of the year, funding one project through the retained fund balance and funding the other through the budget. But anyway, that's the only time we've ever
Yes.
utilized it.
So I
And
guess
we- and-
let me make myself a little clearer. If we were to use those amounts of money that may be retained, what are the specific examples? Can you provide over the history of the last X number of years?
Of-
What we would do with it? Yes.
Well, it would,
I mean, for
Well,
example.
okay,
what-
during
what-
COVID, it would have been available to change our strategy of how we addressed PPE purposes, a delivery,
Kids at home to buy teachers' protective gear.
yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
like I mean, I would, but I
If
don't
you had
know.
like, so if, some examples might be, for example, if we had like a major elevator failure and we had a requirement to replace that, that's something a large expense. Or if we had a serious water issue problem that was gonna require a major
And-
expense to do it, and you can't put that off for another
Right,
year.
and so now these are like things that are
Big things.
emergency situations.
Emergencies, yep.
But it could also be used for things that the budget isn't addressing. So there could be curriculum changes or program changes that are not included in the operating budget that the district still wants to pursue, or things that we had to cut from the budget that they still think is important and needs to be pursued, and they could use that money to do
I
something
personally,
like that.
I'm uncomfortable in going from 1% where we are to a drastic number. If we go there in stages, I might be more comfortable. And if we
Like-
are able to articulate,
I think I want to address what you're saying, Raoul, and suggest maybe a different angle, a different approach to it.
okay?
Only because, really, the way I view this is as a big insurance policy. And really, the only time you buy insurance is when you have a risk you can identify. And I think it'd be easier for us to justify this based on the evaluated risks that we have. Most people in town don't know that, the school district, even though it's not the co-op necessarily, but the school district is in charge of water for the town of Hollis. That that the high school now pumps its own water from its own wells. We have aging infrastructure that each year that we own these buildings is another year of risk, or aging that adds to our risk profile.
That makes sense, but then in the process of eventually supporting the concept, we need to come up with examples,
Yeah.
okay?
But-
And
I agree,
But-
that's what I'm trying to get
and
to.
that's why we
That's
maybe need
actual-
to flesh out a little bit
Yep.
before we actually.
But
I
Darlene made a
like
very
that
important
concept.
point there, which was that the school board can use it for anything they want. It doesn't have to be for something, catastrophic that happens. The school board, in theory, I'm not suggesting they would, but they could decide, we want to
Locally,
renovate
right?
the library, we want to, buy some new equipment for the robotics team and whatnot.
Which is
and do
kind
that
of
off budget
what's been done
this
before,
way.
right?
Well, it
Which is
hasn't
kind of what's been done before.
It hasn't.
Well, maybe,
not with retained.
Not with
fund
retained
balance.
fund
No,
balance.
okay, yeah.
Different than what you said, I thought, that it had to be an emergency.
No, it
No.
doesn't. It
No.
used to be,
Used to
the
have.
original
Now it can be
intention.
for,
So now the
whatever the
school
school
board
board
can-
wants it to be for.
So, well, the reason why I bring
So
up,
that's a
well,
different-
but
that's an
the reason
important
why I
thing.
bring up those programs and things like
Yeah.
that is because if you look at the ESSER funds that are available, the most recent third phase of the ESSER funds required that districts take 20% of the total and are mandated to use it on learning loss initiatives. So that means, so those are programmatic changes. So those aren't fixing infrastructure and things like that. And in a district like ours, where we didn't receive as much funding, there are, we were one of the few districts that had the majority of our students attending school on a daily basis through COVID. There weren't that many in the state, but there are still ramifications of having students learn remotely and change the way curriculum was delivered through Google Classroom and things like that, that isn't always easily adaptive by students, and there were, impacts to that. Well, this district, SAU 41 in total, I'm not sure we really got enough money to really evaluate, learning programs that improve and address learning loss to the degree that other districts did. So if we had more money, there are opportunities to pursue professional development for our staff, to teach them to be better educators using these formats and things like that, that we may not have necessarily been able to pursue. So that's like the opportunity that it allows as well.
So for funds to go into this retained fund balance, what's the decision process that happens for that? Is that a warrant article? Is it a school board decision?
No.
Is there something automatic?
Every August, I give the school board my recommendation for what to put in the fund, and
Yep.
they, up to the limit that we have, which
Yep.
is 1% currently,
Yep.
and then they take a vote on whether or not to approve that.
Okay,
And in an
so,
environment and I would just add, in an environment like this, with the inflation levels that we're looking at, the drastic changes to electricity costs that we're looking at, those are things that we could not have evaluated this far in advance of a budget. So having those additional funds, those kind of risk issues that Tom was talking about, I think is important for our district.
I think that falls into like the emergency type category, but with the thing changing that they can use it for whatever, that, I think changes a lot of potential support for having an emergency fund.
it does.
You know, it's-
There's,
Right, it's
Yeah,
not,
that's-
but it's not
it's-
called an emergency
Yeah.
fund, it's called the
Yeah.
retained fund balance.
I know,
but
I know,
public
but I'm saying
hearing-
if it's meant for stuff like that, it's-
So maybe what we ought to do
Public
is
hearings
write a
is
little
public
point
hearing.
paper that
Yeah.
clearly explains what this is and what it
Yeah.
is not.
it does,
Come up with examples and maybe make a recommendation, and then we can,
well, the thing about examples is that it depends on what your school board is. You may have a school board who says, we're only going to use this for emergencies or for something that's really important like that, and the next school board that comes in,
I
They can do
agree
whatever
with you,
with
that's
it.
why I'm
So
saying,
my
I
concern-
want to get a sense for both sides, how potentially what this is going to be or not be, right?
So my concern is that this is essentially giving the school board the power to expand the budget, basically. Because if they can decide on their own to retain a certain amount, several $100,000, and then spend it on whatever they want, they're effectively expanding the budget beyond what we're doing here.
Theoretically.
And so,
Theoretically, I'm not saying
but
they would
Right.
do that.
the limitation
But that
you're
we're giving
putting,
them- And there's no checks and balances on,
there are
there's no
checks
go
and
back
balances,
to-
it's a public hearing
But
that has
That's
to.
just a
Just a
public
hearing.
hearing. It's not
For
having to
people
go
to speak
back
up.
to March meeting with another warrant article for it. It's
Well,
automatic, they have that. You could put in a warrant article to restrict it if it got, used in ways that people disagreed with. But it does feel like we're basically creating a large off-budget
And I would just,
pool of money for them to continually replenish.
I would just argue that for the largest the same points I made at the meeting, the argument that you just made isn't the same argument that's been put toward Brookline, which has a 2.5% maximum, and Hollis, which has a 2.5% maximum at this point. And I think it really constrains this district, and we have the largest buildings, the largest number of students, and the largest budget, the largest staffing levels,
Largest risk.
and
We have the
largest
best-
risk pool.
We have the best
and
budget committee.
That's true.
But
But
Each one of
we're constrained to the lowest percentage. So my
but-
argument would be to raise it to the 2.5. I think going 5 is too much for the district to consider, and my recommendation to the school board would be to put the warrant up for the 2.5%. That's just my
I
opinion.
think the
So-
justification is there is so much uncertainty with regard to costs and energy, inflation, and all that sort of thing. I think it's good to have this amount of money, and it's not that much when you consider the overall budget. It's a little bit of a cushion. It's there if you need it, and figure out that piece of it later. And I
This is
think,
a
And I would
tough-
argue that if
tough
we're not,
decision.
if it's not a recommendation that we have consensus on as a committee, I would then move back to our discussion of an article for the contingency, because it's imperative that we have either, if not both. To my mind, we should have both, but we need either one.
And the other two districts have.
And the other
So-
two districts have them.
Yeah, but the other two districts, when those 2.5s were put in place, these were emergency funds. It required you go to the state and justify this.
That's not
And the
true in
state would do it.
Brookline. It wasn't a.
It wasn't at the
No,
time?
When we did it in Brookline, we just did it barely a year ago.
Yeah, but I wasn't aware that, personally, I wasn't aware that this process had changed to be so loose from that. I thought,
It was
really-
it was the legislation, and when they passed the 5%, to increase
Yeah.
it to 5%, the legislation at the time,
Yeah.
that was the change
I
that was
know.
made by the
And
legislation.
I've either forgotten or I wasn't aware of that change. And that's a significant change to it because it's no longer contingency fund at that. It could be used as a contingency
It was never
fund.
called a contingency, it was always called a retained fund balance.
Sure, it's
which
called a
is di-
retained fund
Which
balance.
is different, it's
But
just
it was
different.
originally created as an emergency fund for it. I mean, its purpose was originally for emergencies. And now it's
Unexpected.
not that anymore. It's much looser than that, so
I
a
think
little
it's
bit more,
maybe emergency
not quite as.
is a higher threshold than significant need.
Yeah, but there's it's not even significant need, it's completely, I don't
Okay,
wanna
so,
say
but,
it's at
so
the
let me,
whim of the school
well, let me
board.
just say,
The school
for
board's
the,
reasonable, but-
right, and for the years that, again, for the years that we've
Yeah.
had it, so for the,
Yeah,
there still wasn't a recommendation to utilize any of it, because there really was no need, because, from either an emergency perspective, or, quite frankly, if there were some projects that needed to move up, or, money needed to be encumbered, there was money available for that as well. So the district is still managing and still maximizing what it returns to the taxpayer, to its best efforts.
And as the business administrator, I would never recommend using it. I would want to keep that until the end of the year, because you never know what's going to happen. So, yes, the school board can trump me anytime, any day, but it would certainly not be fiscally responsible, in my mind, to spend it in October on something that's a nice-to-have instead of keep it for a must-have later on.
I think it would be a good exercise to try to write everything down here, write it in I mean, not all of us are consistent in terms of understanding what it is or interpreting how it would be used and under what circumstances.
But-
And maybe if we have something in writing, we can then at least,
the problem is that's not binding to future school boards.
well, those are important factors. I mean, I want to be able to see in writing,
Yeah.
at least, if I'm going to
Someone
vote
should
on it,
see what our intent is.
pros and cons, what is it good about this or not so good about it, I don't know. It seems like there are
So,
good arguments on both sides.
I think, Brian, you're really questioning a level of trust, and you're looking out in the future.
Yes, yes.
I think you have that level of trust today, that our
Yes.
existing school board, existing administration has been very responsible in administering funds, and,
Yeah.
We don't feel like they're overspending anywhere in particular, or on anything unnecessary.
But I'm concerned about creating a process that is kind of automatic and has no checks and balances in the future. I mean, going forward with it, it's like you really, you're depending on them to not turn that into an extension of the budget.
Well, and that's what
And-
budget committees are for as
They can
well,
make a
too.
mistake 1 year.
Yeah, but we're giving them that power, taking it away from the budget committee.
Yeah,
They
but,
could
you
use
know,
that power for 1 year.
Yeah, I would
That
agree.
Until people get upset
and then
about
it'd
it.
be back to
Well, they
zero.
would. I mean,
Maybe.
everyone watches everything in this town.
Yeah.
They're curious about a lot of things, and some people dig into the detail, other people just want explanation. But I think you're right. Anyone can do what they want once, and then after that,
I'm
becomes a
just
problem.
cautious about creating a process here that doesn't have any significant checks and balances. I'm much more comfortable with a contingency fund, something like that that's more restricted in purpose than something that's as open-ended as what the legislature has turned this into.
I think what Darlene would
But-
say, what she said earlier, is that you're right, that fund has no restrictions on it. And we've had that fund for a number of years.
Yeah,
with
but
no
how
restrictions on it.
long has it been since that was changed?
Wait, change, you mean
To
the
the
legislature
5%?
changed it?
So it's not
No, I
emergency
mean, when
funds.
it was changed to where it's just the school board deciding whether,
So
in a
for
public
3
hearing.
years?
That was just the last 2 years.
Up to
Yeah,
I
so
think it was
it's
just
very
last 2
recent
years.
It is very recent.
for it. I mean,
But it's been handled respectfully, I would say.
yeah.
We haven't used it.
Yeah, and I would expect that to continue.
In any
Because
di- in
we
any
have-
of the
we have a
districts,
good-
in our
We have a
case.
good school board, but the school board changes from year to year. And sometimes we've had,
We have had school.
there can be very different personalities on both the school board and the budget committee, as we've seen.
Let me also say
So,
that you've
I
done
don't
such a
know.
great job over the years in returning funds back to the district that we haven't had a need to use it.
No.
But if we had a situation where that's not the case, and our actual costs are more than what we budgeted, or at least trending in that direction,
That's
that
the
would be a
very
major
reason-
issue.
And that's the very reason why I would never recommend to use it in mid-year for
Right.
something,
Yeah.
a nice
So I want to be able to understand all these pros and cons of these good
The
arguments
worst
that I'm
thing
hearing.
that could
okay?
happen
Huh?
is that it is used for reasons other than what it's intended for, and then you find out because it slowly slipped away and all of a sudden you need it, then what do? You draw so much attention to it that it would not be fun, it would not be easy to
The
explain
other
to
point was,
the
if you
community.
were going to make recommendations to the school board, you would tell us as part of your meetings here
I
beforehand.
absolutely would.
Right.
You guys would know
And then
maybe
at-
before they would.
Right.
Yeah, but even if it's a nice to have at the end of the year, to me, that's still an issue, because that could still be something that, maybe something that was voted down, for a nice to have, and now all of a sudden, you're at the end of the year, and,
Well, and
These-
the
these
things that we
things
call
get-
nice to
It's-
haves, other people call needs.
yeah.
Well,
It
So-
can be very much a matter of perspective for.
I
on-
think
on-
you'd
on
have a
some of those
problem
things.
in this town if you
Yes.
saw that something that was voted down
And then
all
In
of a
the
sudden
district,
gets purchased.
You don't have
That's
to have people
betraying the
that-
trust of
Yeah,
the
they'd only have to
community.
note that
And
once.
that would not fly very well.
But-
There'd be a lot of people that would have to explain that away. And rightfully so.
Okay, well, this was a great initial conversation. We can continue to think about it as we meander our way through the budget development process. And not, but it is something that we, as we look at it, and we will see, adding a contingency line has an impact to the bottom line level of the budget and the percentage increase in the tax. In fact, even, it's offset by unreserved funds to pay for it and things like that. It all is impactful, and they aren't decisions that should be made like the night of the public hearing. I mean, things need to be posted in advance, and if we're looking to even make a recommendation for the contingency, that's also stipulated by RSA, and again, is a recommendation to the school board for them to ultimately decide, because it's their warrant, of, what gets put on it and what doesn't. So the budget committee, other than the operating budget section, doesn't have any say as to the warrants themselves, unless we were to go the petition route, which I would look to the school board. And again, it can be something we recommend or don't bring up at all, but I think Cindy's heard enough of the conversation where she might just bring it to the school board anyway, and for them to have a similar conversation, and even if we were to recommend it, doesn't mean they would want to pursue it, so. Thank you for that, great, that was
It's a
a
very
Thank you
impressive.
very
memory, by the way.
lively, awesome discussion that I wasn't expecting this evening, so that was
It was
fantastic.
very informative, because
No, it's
I,
great.
I,
No, it's
there were a
great.
lot
I'm
of
not
things about
being-
that I had
No,
no
I
idea
wasn't
that
being
worked this way.
sarcastic, I was like,
It
I'm
was-
glad
this
we had
was-
the conversation,
This was
so.
awesome.
One of the other things I wanted to bring up, is there anything else right now with regard to the budget or warrant articles or anything? I'll give everybody a chance. Well, don't worry, we're going to be revisiting all of it. Regarding the legislative update and overview, I had mentioned earlier that there was an RSA that increases the amount of time districts are responsible for students that receive services through our student services department, so that absolutely would have a financial impact if any of our students kind of are in that age range or get up to that age range, depending on graduation and rates and diplomas and things like that. But the other thing that has an impact financially was a return of 7.5% of our, I believe it's the Group 1 teacher payments into NHRS. So if you can remember, years and years and years ago, the state paid 30% of the NHRS contribution to the districts. That eventually got whittled down, or it didn't get paid to the districts, it was, they paid 30% of the NHRS contributions for employees. That whittled down, and right now, the RSA that passed returns 7.5% of the teacher or Group 1 portion to the districts. So there is the return of that amount of money was designed by the legislature to be a point of tax relief for in the different districts across the state. And they did not stipulate which year it needs to affect a tax rate. So it can be in this year, it could be for next year, and they haven't told anybody what the amounts are yet. So as we move toward rate setting, it would be nice to know what the amounts are, but no one has been notified of that yet. So there is an amount of money that will be available to be returned to offset the tax rate either for this year or next year, and we will be apprised of that eventually.
So based on our numbers, is there a WAG, estimate on that, what that number is?
I don't know. There was some discussion of whether it was specifically just for teachers. There are some administrators that fall into that teacher professional staff rate. So there was some conversation about whether it's teachers only, teachers and administrators, there's like certified administrators and things like that. So we're all kind of just waiting to see what that really translates into. It's a one-year relief, similar to the relief for the statewide education property tax, which we'll
Relief to the
see.
teachers or relief to
No,
the
relief to
district?
the taxpayer, relief to the district and the
Okay.
taxpayers. It is not anticipated to, continue forever unless the current legislation changes. But there's a lot that goes into the calculation. The calculation is by NHRS, not the DRA. And again, just based on timing, it's probably within the next couple of weeks because the tax rates need to be set. But, districts do have the ability to make a recommendation that it be considered for the next tax year as well, because they've made decisions already on unreserved fund balances and retained fund balances and things like that as they're with the move toward rate setting. And so just to kind of let everybody know that's kind of out there. I started reviewing LSRs for the upcoming session of the legislature. There is no detail available other than the title of what it is, and I came up with about 10 out of about 250 that have some type of, they mention a cooperative district. I'm like, all right, well, we'll have to watch that one and see what happens. So it's all kind of, in development. They'll probably be at least double what I saw, if not triple, by the time it's put together. But those are things that I'll just, once there's a little bit more information to the LSRs, I'll put a list together out for everyone so you can kind of get a sense of where the legislature's going. So, with that, I'm not sure if anyone has anything else they'd like to address this evening. I will say, as we move to looking at the calendar, we're looking at the fourth Thursday of October is the 27th. The fourth Thursday in November is Thanksgiving, so we can consider either going to the third Thursday or like a Monday, the 21st, or after Thanksgiving, like Monday, the 28th. We want to keep those dates in mind, and we can decide at our October meeting what we want to do for November. And similarly for December, the fourth Thursday would be December 22nd. So we'll just kind of keep those dates in mind. And really, Thanksgiving is the one that we really kind of need to come up with an alternate date for that meeting. From an agenda building perspective, I think will be all about the budget from now and adding in those things like enrollment levels, adequacy discussions, and things like that as those results become available or estimates become available. I'm not sure if anyone is interested in a special education or student services overview, depending on the calendars of Lauren, if she's available. Maybe
Sure she can be.
for the November meeting, maybe. We could just kind of have a brief little, it's always nice to kind of get an update on what's happening. There are always some changes in new programs and things like that, so.
Remind me when we usually get the budget? What's the time frame for that usually?
It'll be
November.
for your October meeting.
October? Oh, okay, so. So, are you saying the proposed budget would be for the October? Because we haven't set the
Well,
target yet.
Kelly always has kind of a view,
Yep,
the preliminary
The first
view.
view.
okay.
And some of the information in there, like calculation of NHRS and things like that, kind of goes into the guidance
Okay.
calculation, so it's
Right.
kind of that initial.
And
view.
the
Okay,
view
all right,
is
all right.
initial. There's
Yeah.
a lot of unanswered questions.
All right.
We had a really good year last year,
I know.
so I'm kind of hoping for the same thing.
Yeah. And the capital improvements plan along with it.
Yeah, that comes
Yeah.
with it.
Well, I mean,
Event later, that one.
yeah,
At
that
some
will
point,
probably not
yes.
be October because we barely started working on that. So
Yeah.
All right.
it's probably more like November, December.
Yep, all right, great.
And that'll be a warrant article anyway if it happens, so.
Yep.
Can I also suggest for the agenda at a upcoming meeting, a quick overview of the transportation?
Okay, you need to give me more details on what you're looking for there.
An overview of the contract, the amount, what's expected this year, maybe a potential increases for fuel, for additional routes.
So are we,
I don't
are
know.
we in like the second or third year of the contract for transportation?
I think this is the second year, I believe.
Second of three?
Even if it is a quick overview, this is where we are, this is, we don't see any issues, this is what we expect, that sort of thing.
I think we could probably have that as a general discussion as we review the budget.
Yeah,
Okay.
can we do that in November though and not October?
Yeah,
Whatever, I mean, I'm just-
no, we're not doing that in
What I'm just
October.
doing is looking at all these items here, what were the biggest amounts that were saved or are not saved, and I'm trying to pick a couple of them just to,
Yeah, but that discussion isn't gonna give you that answer because that answer is special education.
So when you, so
But
what happens,
just-
so when we get the budget and you go to the transportation section and you expand it, there are probably 15 different lines. And some of them are in-district special education, out-of-district special education. They're all different, and as well as the regular routes.
Right.
So it's all kind of included in there, and you have to just kind of like fish out and really
in my
extract what
business,
you're
when I want to
looking
know
for.
something and get the 5-minute view, I usually have 3 or 4 view graphs that I build just to tell you the whole story. That's kind of what my term of reference.
Okay,
And so if I had something like that in here, it would be a little more than what I see on the lines. And it would give me a sense of what are the factors, the considerations, the trends. I don't know. I don't know if this is out of bounds or not.
I
but-
think it really is. I think it, I think we get, again, everyone can, please contribute. I think we get a very significant overview of the budget as we work through that new items section. And I think it's incumbent on us as budget committee members to ask the questions.
Yeah.
Okay, we didn't really address transportation this evening. Can you tell me more about that?
Okay.
Or, in this particular category of, are we changing something about curriculum in this area that's necessitating this change or something like that? I think that with all of the information that we are provided, I think it becomes incumbent on us to kind of follow up and ask a lot of those questions, because we don't see, especially in a year where we're not negotiating the transportation contract, there aren't going to be
pretty straightforward.
substantive changes.
right.
So, I mean, a good question, I think is to ask with all of the building and development in the towns, does it necessitate extra routes? And if not, and it all falls in line, then I think,
I'm happy. I mean,
yeah,
Yeah.
I think we can,
I don't want to add extra work to
Yeah,
you, but at the
And
same
that-
time, I'm interested in that topic, so.
Right, and I'm
Just play
trying
by
to
ear.
answer questions and getting that in advance is very helpful.
Yes.
But I don't, of all the things you could pick, that's not gonna give you a lot of information.
Okay.
Then I would ask the question,
Yeah, I like
They're large
ours.
numbers.
what is it that you would say in this entire budget of all the different things, do you lose sleep over? Which things are you concerned most about hitting the mark or missing the mark? You don't have to go-
Special ed,
Special ed,
yep.
that
'Cause
is, you never
in
know.
1 year, and in fact, we've been struggling in Brookline for years now, and we think we've got it okay, and then someone moves in. And it's a very expensive move-in, and especially with a budget like Brookline's, which is super bare bones, not that yours isn't, but there is no wiggle room in that budget. So when we have special ed changes, last year we were sweating bullets on going to the special ed trust, but in the end, with all the unfilled positions, we were able to cover all the costs, so.
Yeah.
But if we had been fully staffed, it would have been a
It
different.
would have been, it's going to the trust, I'm sure.
Because
And we may be there this year again.
it's not that difficult when you see in the beginning of the year, or even from last year, those that are enrolled, this year, and see what their needs
Oh,
are,
yeah, we
because
can
it's the same as,
predict that, yeah.
it's the things that, some kid goes skiing and breaks both legs, and now they need extra help for
Sure.
a period of time. Those
Sure.
are the unforeseeables, and I don't know what you do and how you do that, and how often that happens, and maybe I'm thinking of something that just isn't that much important to the overall scheme of things. But you would be able to tell us better that your concerns are in these particular categories,
Sure.
in special,
Right.
transportation or special
Yeah, I mean,
training,
I
or
can
special
certainly,
needs.
when we start talking about this next budget,
Yeah.
I can point out things that I could be worried about, but, I mean, of course, special ed, I'm just gonna say special ed, because I don't know the details like Lauren would, who will have come and talk in November, and she can let you know what those are.
And let me know, typically when we've done that conversation, we have had, we've sectioned out a part of the budget, part of the agenda to be non-public, just because I wouldn't say there's never student-specific information shared, but just, to kind of make sure everybody is on the same playing field, kind of understanding and things like that. Our questions, could run the risk of Lauren not being able to answer in public because of various issues, so we typically allow some time for a non-public session to kind of discuss that.
Okay. So, yeah, I will make sure she's invited to that.
Great. Anything else at this point? Process observer?
Process observer, let's see, I observed a lot of things this evening. The one thing you were very specific about starting the meeting at 6:33.
She puts it in the minutes. So, she needs to know when the meeting starts and ends, so.
That was my first observation, preciseness. It was a great meeting. I think it was very informative for all. I learned from this experience, and I think we all had a lot of input, which was very good, focused on certain things. I think that the tech ed hit me as something that was a concern, but I'm sure it'll be addressed. The budget overview was wonderful. It really encouraged a lot of us to communicate, and that was exceptionally good. Those are my overall observations. Any questions on that? I'd be glad to answer, but I'll leave the rest to you.
Okay, great. Well, we are a little bit ahead of schedule this evening at 8:10 PM. I would take a
And
motion
15
to
seconds.
adjourn from Tom, seconded by Brian. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, it's unanimous at 7-0. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you
We'll
again for
see you
this.
in October.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, this is great, Kelly, thank you.
I had a question. I was asked